Grace, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here.
It's really good to have you. Could you briefly, for the people who may be unfamiliar with you, explain who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I'm Grace Price, and I am the creator of Traveling Genes. I can be found on Twitter, where I am on a mission to flatten the cancer curve for future generations, specifically mine, Gen Z. And I'm doing this through translating the health jargon that we see in a lot of studies that are published today into actionable insights for people so that ultimately they can use certain lifestyle habits like changing their diet to prevent cancer in the future. So I spend most of my time researching the connection between food and epigenetics, which is just a fancy term for the way that our genes are expressed. And there's a lot of really interesting stuff coming out about how our diet impacts the way that our genes are expressed in a way that can lead to cancer proliferation. So yeah, I'm really excited to be here. And that's kind of my little spiel.
All right, fellas, sorry for interrupting this episode of the podcast with Grace Price. If you're enjoying it so far, I hope you are. Please consider subscribing to the channel. It is super easy to do for you. As a matter of fact, it's almost effortless to do, but makes a huge difference for the podcast. Do that. Thank you so much and enjoy the rest of the episode. Yeah, very good. Yeah. And so you're Gen Z.
Yes.
You're 17, correct?
I am. I'm still in high school.
Which is mind blowing. I mean, I still am a dumbass. I'm 25, but when I was 17, I was really stupid. So it is unbelievably admirable to see a 17-year-old go into this and have this mission to literally save human lives. It's crazy.
Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely very close to my heart, though, because I mean, we all have our own cancer stories. Like everyone knows someone who's experienced the disease. And mine was really with my great grandpa. And I think I just realized that I was so tired of it being in the doctor's hands. Like I wanted to be able to do something to help him. And I felt like it was so out of my control. But when I learned about this connection between epigenetics and food, it really changed the way that I thought about how we develop chronic disease. Because the truth is, the way that our health system is set up in America is we are made to, when we get sick, just stay a little bit better, but we stay sick. We never really get better. And they don't want us healthy, but they also don't want us to die. So it's this weird in between. And we're not focused on prevention at all, which whatever cure you could ever fathom for a chronic disease is like, it's never going to be as impactful as just preventing the disease from ever happening in the first place. So I'm focusing a lot on prevention because it's just so powerful. And yeah, that really excited me that I felt like I could genuinely make an impact in other people's lives.
Yeah, I remember during COVID, they gave people donuts to get vaccinated.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
It's crazy. No, there's
No, go ahead. Yeah.
Corruption in our system. Yeah, I just have some crazy, like, just from like literally Googling, you can find some crazy things like how the Sugar Association basically bribed Harvard researchers in the 1950s to blame fat and cholesterol as the primary cause of heart disease. But it's literally, so yeah, they said that, but it's still the number one cause of death in the US. So it's like they do these things and you're like, why are you really shifting the blame to that? And then you look and you see it's because they're trying to say that sugar was okay back then. And now we all know that sugar is bad and it seems kind of like an obvious thing, but it's just, there's a lot of these guidelines that were posted that have shaped American health today. The American Cancer Society accepted like a 1.9 million donation from Coca-Cola when obesity is a huge risk factor for cancer and sugar leads to obesity. So there's just a lot of really questionable things. Even the most recent US dietary guideline, which I'm sure you've seen on Twitter, but it's where they put like Fruit Loops above eggs and stuff. And you're like, what is this? 95% of the members on that committee had conflict of interest, and 60% of that conflict of interest was research funding. So it's like, what kind of research are we really getting if it's being funded by people who want a specific answer? We're not going to be getting stuff that's genuinely going to help our health if this is what like the basis is. So
And how do we change that?
Yeah. So I think that the best way to change that is to just take matters into our own hands. This kind of brings me to my mission, really, which is to flatten the cancer curve. And I think that the best way to do this is to target Gen Z because they are kind of our future. Like they're our future innovators, our future singers, artists, whatever it is. And the best way to start by avoiding cancer is to just cut down ultra processed foods. You'll see all of these different people that are like, you need to do the carnivore diet, the ketogenic diet, and those are all great. But if you just start like with the basics, it's you have to stop eating stuff that just comes from a package because 60% of the average American's daily caloric intake comes from this stuff. It's ultra processed food. And what's in that is seed oils, refined grains, refined sugars, all of these things that cause inflammation. And not only do these increase cancer risk, but they increase risk for other chronic diseases, which also can increase cancer risk. Because, like, if you have type 2 diabetes, you also have increased cancer risk. They're all connected because they have the same root cause, which is this inflammation that is just causing these diseases to develop. So I think targeting that and getting my generation to really just cut out eating this food would have such a major impact.
Mm. You study at what's called an alpha school?
Yes.
So this is something I'm very unfamiliar with. I just read this today before our conversation. What is that exactly?
Yeah, so Alpha is a startup school where we learn everything on online apps. So we have no teachers. We spend 3 hours every morning doing our core subjects, so math, science, English, and we kind of switch between 25 minutes for each subject. And by doing this, we learn 2 times as fast as any other kid at an average school. It's because doing online apps, like you can just get so much further ahead because we practice these things called skill stacking, which is where you're actually mastering content and then you can add another skill on top of that. Like if you don't master fractions in elementary school, then it's going to be a lot harder for you to do some of the higher maths like geometry. So
Right.
because we are mastery based learning, we don't have as many holes and it's much easier for us to get ahead quicker. So we do that. And then for high schoolers in the afternoon, we get to spend time on our passion projects, which most people, I try to say it's like a high school thesis, except not really, because it's a lot cooler than that. So we do it for all 4 years of high school, from freshman year to senior year. And we pick something that we're really passionate about, and then we develop our one liner. So my one liner is that I wanted to find the prevention and cure for cancer through the connection between food and epigenetics, which is a huge goal to have in high school. But
Hmm.
we all have these really ambitious goals that we are chasing after, and we get to spend 2 hours in the afternoon every single day at school on that. And then we also have all of our time after school. So it's really cool that we get supported in that way.
That's incredible. So you study from home or do you go somewhere with your peers and study?
Yes, it is in person. Yeah. So we go to a school. We're located in downtown Austin right now, and it's really awesome. Y'all should definitely check out the website if you want to see that.
Yeah. Ah, cool. So you've done this through the entirety of high school?
Yes.
Man, that's amazing. Education is something I'm unbelievably fascinated by. It's so different everywhere in the world, and the education system is super flawed as well, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah. Hmm.
Even like what you talk about should be part of your education.
Yep.
Nutrition is so massive, and it's just I can't fathom how it's not part of a basic education to know these basic things about nutrition.
Yeah, no, I completely agree because it's not like it's just dictating your health or what you look like physically. Like it genuinely is impacting your metabolic health. And that means that it's impacting your mental health. And there's just so many things that it's correlated to because they have similar pathways. And all of that is being overlooked because they're trying to push specific guidelines and ideas that nutritionists, doctors, all of them have to say because of the things like the USDA that just have their own idea of what health looks like. So,
Mm. Nutrition is so overwhelming. I think
yeah.
that is probably one of the biggest problems for most people. They don't know where to start.
Exactly.
And like whenever I start to think that, okay, now I know quite a bit about nutrition, there's a new topic that arises where I realize, wow, I know nothing about this topic.
Totally. That's me every day. And I spend
Yeah.
a lot of time researching this. Yeah. There's always something new within it. So I think it's really important to keep it simple for people who are starting and just say, hey, take the most obvious things that you're eating that you're like, this probably isn't good for me, and try to reduce that, because that will make you healthier.
Mm,
It's a lot more simple than a lot of people will make it seem.
mm. So you don't think that people should start calorie counting, understanding macros and micros? That's not necessary for understanding basic health, I suppose, in nutrition?
Yes. I think, yeah, if you want to see an impact right away, you do not need to know calorie counting, macros, micros. You don't even have to commit to a diet yet, because I feel like people spend so much time getting overwhelmed by, oh, well, I don't know which diet I associate with, because it's almost like a religion in a weird way. Like, oh,
Mm,
well, I am on this diet.
hmm.
And the thing is, too, with diets, they don't really last for a long time. If you can commit to one and like you really actually commit to it, it's not just like dirty keto or something, then that's great. Like, do that. But for a lot of people, it's hard because you're doing it on your own and you're doing it in a system that is against you. Because a
Yeah.
lot of people will say things like, oh, well, it's your choice to eat unhealthy. And the thing is, that would be true if the system wasn't rigged. If you don't have these big food companies and corporations that are literally pushing what they want you to eat in all of these aspects of our everyday life, we just don't even realize it. And so that is definitely what I would say. That's where you need to start.
Mm. Yeah, and it's not necessarily that people have the choice. They also there's a lot of things that they don't know. For example, there's in America especially, there's so much sugar in bread. I mean,
Oh my gosh, yes.
in milk as well. There's sugar in everything over there.
Yeah. No, there really is. It's crazy. Even I recently wrote a thread on fruit juice, which caught a lot of
Hmm.
attention because I said that it was child abuse to give your child fruit juice, because ultimately fruit juice is going to have the effects of obesity and all these chronic diseases. And I think it's genuinely not okay that parents are going to, I never blame it on the kids when they are eating these foods, because they're completely influenced by their parent at that point in time.
Mm.
So if their parents are choosing to give them juice, that is going to have long-term negative effects on their life that can't be ignored. And I think that the most concerning part is like, in 1 cup of apple juice, you have 32 grams of sugar. And it's not like this sugar has the fiber in it, because a lot of people will be like, oh, well, what about 100% juice? That's healthy, right? Because it's freshly squeezed. And the issue is that there's not enough fiber in that, because the fiber comes from the skin and the pulp. And most of these juices don't have that. And so when the fiber isn't bonded to these sugars, then it's going to cause a glucose spike because it's going to be rapidly digested. And there's so much fructose in these juices. And fructose, I mean, that generates uric acid, which not a lot of people talk about this, but uric acid accumulation is one of the things that can lead to a lot of components of metabolic syndrome, which I don't think many people realize how serious metabolic syndrome is yet, because metabolic syndrome can be connected to all of these other chronic diseases as well. So it's definitely not something
What is it? Metabolic syndrome?
it's basically where your metabolism is thrown off, so you're more likely to develop obesity, diabetes, all of these kind of food related disease that we think about.
Mm, okay. Yeah, the fruit juice thread on Twitter that you made was the one that I found you from,
uh that's good.
along with a lot of other people, I think, which it was really interesting. What is the issue of having glucose spikes?
So glucose spikes are not good, because what happens is when you have a spike in glucose in your blood, you also are going to have a spike in insulin, because insulin is what's going to bind to your cell receptors to let them know that glucose needs to be let in, because you have all this glucose that needs to go somewhere. It's not going to stay in your blood. And so when you have a ton of insulin spikes as well, what can happen is your cells can become desensitized to the insulin. So they can stop responding to this insulin. And what's bad about that is when they stop responding to this insulin, then you just have all of this sugar that isn't getting put in cells. And that's when it starts to get stored as fat, and you start to have very unbalanced glucose levels, plasma glucose levels in your blood. So it just gets really bad from there on out, and you get more risk for type 2 diabetes and all of those kinds of things.
Is that what's called insulin resistance?
Yes.
Interesting. So let's take 5 foods that you would cut out of the normal person's diet.
Okay. How specific do you want me to get?
As specific as you want.
I would say, there's really 3 that I think are pretty bad. But so overall, get rid of ultra processed foods. So just try to avoid anything that comes in a package or a box. It's always best to get something that's either locally sourced, so from a farmer's market, or I'm sure you've seen on Twitter, there's all of those tweets that'll say, go on the perimeter of the grocery store. Don't go in the center. The center is all the aisles with the processed foods. So do that. I would say avoid seed oils. I've also written a thread on that. Seed oils are surprisingly bad because you'll see these articles online published by Harvard that'll say seed oils are good. It's a great source of omega-3s and omega-6s. And those are considered essential fatty acids because our body doesn't produce them. So typically it's good to increase our intake of those because they help our cell walls and all of these things. Except the issue with seed oils is the polyunsaturated fats are so unstable that when you actually use seed oils, they just get oxidized and damaged, and they turn into toxic things such as aldehydes and lipid peroxides, which damage our cells, and they can create free radical chain reactions in our cells, which is where basically, because certain molecules always want to have I'm going to take you back to chemistry a little bit, but in chemistry, they have their octet of electrons. So they want to stay satisfied with that. They want to have a certain amount of electrons. When a molecule is oxidized, it loses an electron because one takes it from it. So it no longer is stable. So then that's going to create a chain reaction of all these molecules stealing electrons from other molecules to try to satisfy their own octet. And so in a cell, what this looks like is it just looks like fires getting started up everywhere. Suddenly your mitochondria is damaged, your DNA is damaged, your proteins are damaged, your plasma membrane around the cell is damaged. And all of these things we want to try to keep obviously in a healthy state. And so it gets really bad. And it's quite ironic actually, because you would think that cooking with the cooking oil would be fine, but it just gets so much worse. And all of these, tons of restaurants use them. You have to ask, I go to restaurants because I try to avoid eating them. And I have to ask them hey, I'm allergic to seed oils. Do y'all use them in your food? And I've had to order salads with a side of chicken so many times because I just don't know whether it's cooked in seed oils, and I'm not willing to risk it. So
what about just seeds then? I eat a lot of pumpkin seeds and sunflower seeds.
Yeah, so seeds most of the time are fine, except if you buy them in it'll come in a little plastic container or something, and you look at the ingredients on the back, sometimes seeds are covered in seed oils also. I've got almonds before that had sunflower oil in them, and I was like, why did you put sunflower oil in my almonds? I just want salted almonds, bro. And so then I had to go and buy a different brand of almonds. But I would just say it's something you really have to check for. So yeah, seed oils. And then your initial question, right? So after that, I would say refined sugars and refined grains are the last ones. Like you said, bread here is just carbs. It's just sugar. And a lot of people, because of certain USDA guidelines that came out in the 1980s, they think that grains is something they need to have in their diet. A large portion of their diet should be made up of these things, but it's really just eating more sugar. So if you're eating tons of grains and then you're eating your dessert, whatever that is, if it's candy, slushies, I don't know, just anything that looks like sugar, it's just so much that it's bound to create a lot of bad stuff in your body, and it's going to lead to obesity and all of these things. So I would say eliminating those, and then eliminating things that look like sugar as well, that people recognize. They're like, oh yeah, that's that would be a treat. That has a lot of sugar in it. So whatever that may be for you, whether it's candy, I don't know, Coke, other sodas, stuff like that.
Mm.
Yeah.
You did mention this a little bit before, but what's the difference between when sugar is refined and the natural sugar that we find in fruits, for example?
Yeah, so when it's refined, it just means that it's been processed more. And what you'll see is a lot of the things in the US are just ultra processed. Even if you look at like a lot of our crops here, like the number one subsidies in the US are these crops such as like corn and grain. And you look at that and you're like, okay, that says a lot about what it is that we're eating because so many things are just highly subsidized and it really has an impact on what makes up our diet when you look like you break it down into what are all the food groups we're eating and stuff. So yeah, I would just say things are a lot more processed here in general.
Okay. And so, what are some foods that people should eat more of?
So, foods that people should eat more of, I always recommend, just based off of like what I've read and stuff, eating more protein because it's really important to try to maintain your lean body mass, especially as you grow older. Maintaining that is super, super vital because it helps prevent injury, it improves your metabolism, all these really great things because you start to lose some of your lean body mass, which is just like your bones, bodily fluids, and your muscle mass. Like that's all that it encompasses. I would say eating healthy fats. So a lot of people, some people still think that saturated fat is bad. But I've actually found quite the opposite. And when you're on certain diets, like the keto diet, saturated fat is like one of the best things for your metabolic health because it helps you produce ketones, which are a super efficient source of energy. And so saturated fat is another thing that I think is important in your diet. And I also think it's important to, just really balance out. Like I personally eat fruit and vegetables, but I know some people like don't do that. But I would just say like try not to eat too much fruit because there definitely are people who eat a lot of fruit. And I mean, that is still sugar as well. Like you have to recognize things that are just made up of carbohydrates. And vegetables are too, but I don't think I have the problem of eating too many vegetables. So yeah, that's what I would recommend.
And so recently there's this about vegetables, about these what is it called? Chemical protection mechanisms from vegetables, or that
I think
vegetables has these defense mechanisms. Paul Saladino talks a lot about this.
yes, I believe those are called oxalates, and they, yeah, I mean, it's tricky because vegetables have these really great things in them called polyphenols, which when I was talking about seed oils earlier and those chain reactions that occur, the only thing that can stop them are antioxidants. So polyphenols are a type of antioxidant, which are just super stable molecules that can kind of put out these fires. And whenever you have too much inflammation, like it causes all of those reactions and it can lead to oxidative stress. But the only way to counteract oxidative stress is to increase your amount of antioxidants and try to reduce the foods that cause inflammation and stuff, obviously. But when you eat more antioxidants, then you come into more of a balanced state so that you can kind of try to like retroact all of that inflammation and stuff that was occurring. And so vegetables are good for that, but I mean, when you eat them raw, they also have those things like that, those toxic chemicals that Paul Saladino was talking about that aren't the best for you. And so it's tricky because when you cook them, then the polyphenols, like the concentration of them and their bioavailability goes down a little bit depending on the way that you cook them. But that also does eliminate some of those other toxic chemicals that we were talking about earlier. So I don't know, vegetables are a little tricky in my mind. I would say just eat them with moderation and try to be updated on research because I find so many things like that where there's good and bad to the food.
Right.
Which again brings me back to my main point, which is that like if you're able to avoid ultra processed food, like I don't think that vegetables are your main concern if all you're eating is stuff from a package. Like, I don't think that that is going to be the biggest issue in your diet.
Right. I definitely understand why people are starting to lose some sort of trust in all this new science coming up because okay, all of a sudden now fruit aren't healthy because they're essentially sugar, and now vegetables aren't healthy. They got these toxic chemicals in them. It keeps getting more and more overwhelming, I feel like.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think it's really difficult too when there's so much confirmation bias behind the organizations we're supposed to trust. You would think that the American Cancer Society, that is trying to help you prevent cancer, would give you actually good advice. But if you just go and click on some of the recipes, for example, like the American Heart Association recommends, they'll have stuff with tons of sugar in it. And you're like, are you really going to recommend that right now? Or Harvard, or a lot of these other big places where I just think that it's gotten to the point where there's so much money behind all of this stuff. If you just follow the money, it starts to make a lot more sense why there's so many contradicting things online, specifically concerning nutrition. So yeah, I would say we're in a very interesting time for nutrition right now, but it's exciting as well because I believe that we are going to try to return back to how we ate before the 1950s, before we had a health epidemic as a country. And I think that that is going to really, really help us avoid all of these chronic diseases that are just skyrocketing in our country right now.
Mm. What does your diet look like?
Yeah, so my diet is basically just, I try to eat a low carb diet. Um, and I'm not perfect. Like, I will break occasionally, but I am very strict about avoiding seed oils and avoiding ultra processed food. So like I said, like I'll eat fruit and I'll eat vegetables, and I don't really count to make sure that I'm under like the 50 grams that you have to be for the keto diet. But I do try to avoid a lot of breads at least and stuff. I also exercise for 45 minutes to like 60 minutes each day. That helps because there's a lot of lifestyle factors and stuff that impact our epigenetics. And I try to get sleep as well. I'll get like 8 hours on average most of the time, but my circadian rhythm could be better because I go to bed at 10 some nights, or I'll go to bed at like 11 other. It's just like it still throws your body off even if you're getting the same hours of sleep. And then I do not drink alcohol as well. And I know that it's obviously not legal at my age, but there are definitely a lot of my peers that drink currently, and it's very concerning to me how no one talks about
Yeah.
how problematic this is. Like, if you just look at how it affects their brain, it can reduce the learning memory portion of their brain, their hippocampus, by 10%. That's so bad. Like, that's going to impact them permanently the rest of their life. And so it's not even like, because you'll hear parents be like, oh yeah, don't drink, but then you'll be like, oh yeah, you can test a little bit of wine and stuff.
Mm.
But when their brains are still developing, like, it's not even a matter of whether it's legal or not. It's that it's literally going to permanently affect you. So like, it's not something I want to participate in and stuff. And I think it needs to be talked about more.
Yeah, for sure. How do you feel about the saying, one glass of wine a day is good for you?
To keep the doctors away.
Yeah.
I, I definitely have a lot of thoughts on wine. I think that alcohol is a toxin, and it creates all of these things in our body, like aldehydes, that can be carcinogenic. There are lots of studies that point it towards increasing cancer risk in a lot of different cancers, such as colorectal cancer, breast cancer, just from drinking pretty often. And wine, I think that a lot of people have this notion as it's like very healthy because it has, a couple of articles have come out that there's resveratrol in it, which has like anti-aging properties. Except if you do the math and you calculate how much of that resveratrol is actually in the wine, it's very insignificant compared to how much you're getting in one glass. So you would have to drink tons of glasses to be able to get the benefit from that. And then at that point, you're just getting so much alcohol that it's outweighing whatever
Mm.
kind of benefit you would get. So that is definitely my stance on that.
What was it called? The anti-aging thing?
Resveratrol.
Resveratrol?
I can put it right here.
Can you get that from somewhere else? Or is it exclusively from wine?
You can get resveratrol also as a supplement. Because it is found in grapes. So that's why it's in wine, because it's found in the red grapes. But it's, again, the portion in it just is not significant enough for it to really be considered a benefit.
Right. So why do you eat low carb?
I eat low carb because I have learned that a lot of times when you eat too many carbs, it can overrun your mitochondria and it can impact your metabolic health poorly, which is just the way that your body is going to digest food and kind of how efficient your mitochondria is. And so, in order to keep a lot of oxidative stress from occurring within our cells, because whenever you eat a ton of carbs, your mitochondria can become overrun and it can create a lot of oxidative stress in your body. I try to avoid as many carbohydrates as I can because it definitely takes more care of my mitochondria than if I were to just eat a ton of them.
What is that word? Mitochondria?
Mitochondria.
Mitochondria. And what's that?
That is, in high school, you'll hear it's the powerhouse of the cell, but it's basically where sugar and all of these like compounds are then converted into ATP, which is free energy that our cells can use for chemical reactions, whether it would be transporting certain things across the plasma membrane or trying to create a specific molecule or something. That's what it's used for. So ATP is used for all chemical reactions in our cells in our entire body. So it's really important that we take care of our mitochondria because they literally provide us with our energy. And so you want to make sure that you're being efficient as well with how much ATP output you're getting and stuff like that, depending on what it is that you're eating.
Epigenetic, I can't speak today. Epigenetics is a new term that I heard recently. Can you get into that?
Yeah, so epigenetics is very exciting. It is basically the effect that our environment has on our gene expression, which then can be this like impact can be inherited from cell to cell. So chemical markers are, I refer to epigenetics as these chemical markers because they turn genes on and off. And most of the time, these chemical markers will look like DNA methylation or histone acetylation. And these little like tabs that are put on our DNA are reversible. So, like I said, they can sometimes be turning gene on, sometimes turning it off. And lifestyle factors that affect this are food, sleep, exercise, sunlight, inflammation, air quality, all of these things that are in your environment. And what I think is so interesting about epigenetics is it really makes you realize that unhealthy choices isn't just a matter of you becoming an unhealthy person. It's literally affecting the expression of your genes. And I think it's important to note that the reason why the expression of our genes matters is because our DNA codes for our proteins in our cells. So whatever genes are on, those proteins are then going to be created more often than if the gene is turned off and less expressed. Those proteins will be created less often. And those proteins are going to do a lot of cellular functions and help out with certain things. So the epigenetics of cancerous cells often looks like oncogenes turned on and overexpressed, which these are just tumor proliferating genes. They allow tumors to be caused. One example of this is the oncogene CMYC is overexpressed in over 50% of cases across all cancer types. And I think that this is so interesting for future cancer treatments because due to epigenetic changes being reversible, you don't need to necessarily use as intense of a treatment to try to reverse these changes. Instead of using something like chemotherapy that is very intense and can have a huge toll on your body, if we could just alter the chemical markers on our DNA, it could have a very, very little impact on us negatively, and it could definitely help prevent and reduce the amount of cancerous cells in our bodies. So I think that epigenetics is very connected to cancer, and especially the way that our nutrition affects our epigenetics and cancer is very interesting and will be something that we're looking more into in the future. And so that's why I'm researching it right now.
That is unbelievably fascinating. Is there something recently that you've learned about this that surprised you?
Yeah, I think that the fact that there are a lot of foods, like I mentioned, that are antioxidants, like polyphenols, that can help your epigenetics in a positive way, such as allowing for certain tumor suppressor genes to be more expressed. And these tumor suppressor genes do exactly what you would think. They help suppress tumors. And so they're very important to have in your cells. And just the fact that there are certain foods that we can eat that then break down into these compounds that can have that effect on your cells and literally prevent cancer is so powerful in my mind. So one example of that is curcumin, which is found in turmeric. You can eat that in your diet and you will absorb some of that, but what a lot of integrative medicine places use, which is where they do traditional cancer treatment and also they address lifestyle factors as well, and will try to do more like natural remedies and treatments. They will use turmeric intravenously to treat cancer cells. So they will give it to you in an IV. And then the absorption rate in that is like 100%. That's great absorption rate. So people are already using this to help reverse cancer, which is really, really cool to me.
Yeah, that is unbelievably fascinating. Something that is literally just naturally available to us can do something so incredible.
Exactly. Yes.
That's crazy, yeah.
Definitely.
Is there something else that you want people to know about before we wrap up here?
I would basically just say that, I mean, as of right now, the way that Gen Z is heading is very scary. We have depression at an all-time high, anxiety at an all-time high. 30% of us have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. We are pre-diabetic. 1 in 5 of us is obese. There's all of these very, very scary statistics that are coming out due to our diet. And the truth is, like, we have to do something about it right now. And that's why I'm going up on these podcasts to try to speak about it, because I really, really want this to be the conversation, because I'm just tired of adults pretending like this is not something that needs to be addressed, or this is something that's okay, or if it plays into the way that the money is going, then it's fine, because this is literally our future of our entire like nation is at stake, because these kids are our future. And right now, their diet is unacceptable and the way that we're eating is unacceptable. And it's not their fault, but to make a change, we have to start by really talking about what is happening. Even if it's scary, how much it's impacting chronic disease and all of these things, we have to realize that to then make a change. So I just would say that is the overall message. And I do not plan on stopping anytime soon spreading that message.
Why do you think adults neglect this so much and pretend that this is not happening and their diet is proper, even though it's full of ultra processed food and etc.?
I think that a lot of it just comes from what they learned when they were growing up, and what they hear from nutritionists and doctors. It's surrounding us everywhere. And I also think it's a lot of times hard for parents to want to change their diet which then makes it hard for them to encourage a healthy diet in their kids, because kids are all they see when they're growing up is their parents' habits. So I was very lucky. My parents are super healthy. They always are working out. They've always tried to tell me, like, hey, let's not eat too much sugar, all of these things. But when parents have those habits, that is what their kids are most likely going to develop as well as their own habits. And so I think it becomes hard as well when it's something where the parents don't really want to change their ways. And that's the best way to help support the kids change their ways.
Right. I think there's also this narrative by influencers of body positivity that kids look up to and are very impressionable too. They see these influencers saying that it's okay to be obese. There's nothing dangerous about it. You should just love yourself for being morbidly obese, and not worry about your health.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of normalization going on currently. And just from a science and health standpoint, it it shouldn't even come. It's very sad to me that it comes to a matter of people should never be mean to other people or insult other people, regardless of whatever it is. You should just always be a kind person. It's unacceptable that people are mean. But obviously there are people out there that are going to do that. But it's not helping by telling people that obesity isn't obesity,
Mm,
because it it is, and there are ways to fix it. And that's what's so exciting, because it's not something that you're going to have to struggle with, because obesity is serious and it does increase risk for cancer, diabetes, heart disease, all of these things that are really bad. And I think that we have to get uncomfortable as much as it is, to be able to talk about this, because it's something that we have to address, at least scientifically, to be able to get to the root cause of these other diseases. So yeah, I definitely agree. It makes it hard when there's all of these different kind of narratives that are being pushed around for our generation. And our generation also is very scared to ask questions and to speak about certain things, because they are afraid of going against all of these different narratives, whatever they may be. And I just have the viewpoint that I love to look for answers. And I think it's important that everyone takes everything with a grain of salt and does their own research for things, because we all have access to Google. We're living in the age of
mhm.
information. Like, we are able to figure out where we stand on these things. And I would just say, if you don't know, just look it up and like read a little bit, and you'll find whatever it is, whatever conclusion you land on, you'll find because of that.
Right. Grace, what you do is admirable, and thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much.
One more time, where can people find your work?
Yeah, so you can find me at Traveling Jeans on Twitter, and you can also find me at TrueMed Payments on Twitter, because I'm currently interning there this summer, and we're doing a little collaboration where I am running their Twitter account currently. And so that has also been very exciting. They're a super cool company where we are financially incentivizing people to use supplements, nutritional food and exercise as medicine by allowing them to use HSA and FSA funds to pay for these products. So a lot of your favorite products you can buy through TrueMed using these untaxed dollars, and ultimately it allows you to save around 35% by using these untaxed dollars. So yeah, you can find me at those two places.
Cool. Thanks, Grace. This was great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the podcast with Grace Price. If you enjoyed this episode and you learned something, please consider subscribing to the podcast. It's just a suggestion. It would be really cool if you did so. In return, I promise that I'll continue to work hard on delivering these episodes to you on a regular basis. I know that I get smarter every episode, which is probably one of my favorite things about this podcast, that you and I learn simultaneously. Did I pronounce that right? Simultaneously? I can never pronounce that word. Regardless, thank you so much. Subscribe to the podcast. It's almost effortless for you to do, but makes a huge difference. Thank you, and until next time, peace.